LeeRoy Yarbrough, nicknamed LeeRoy, was born September 17, 1938, in Jacksonville, Florida. He was one of 6 children that the couple Lonnie and Minnie would have during their time together, and since LeeRoy was the eldest son, he was therefore named after his father. Both Lonnie and Minnie were Florida born and raised, with Lonnie making his living running a roadside vegetable stand. They lived on the west side of Jacksonville, which provided LeeRoy with a humble beginning. He found escape from his hardship in the local Moon's garage, where he learned his basic mechanical skills and founded his love in racing. He, at the age of 12, built his first car, implanting a Chrysler engine into a 34 Ford Coupe. He then dropped out of 10th grade and began racing at the local Jacksonville Speedway. At age 16, LeeRoy was a race winner. At age 18, LeeRoy married a 16-year-old Gloria Sapp. Keep in mind, this was the 1950s, so that was not uncommon, and the couple would become friendly with the owner of Jacksonville Speedway, Julian Klein. Whilst LeeRoy was enjoying his racing at the little speedway, a new track was being built in Florida, a 2.5-mile spectacle that challenged anything he would ever see. Running at Jacksonville, LeeRoy developed an incredible knack of driving it incredibly deep into turn 3, and then running extremely close to the wall. It was a style that allowed him to attack his rivals at almost any time. By 1960, LeeRoy's marriage had apparently been plagued by alcohol, as his wife Gloria had been frequenting the bars more often. That didn't affect him at making his first attempt at a Cup start, going up to North Carolina at the Charlotte Moore Speedway. He would D&Q for the 1960 National 400. That was the secondary race run at Charlotte in October. They decided to try again in Atlanta a couple of races later, and they made that race, qualifying 18th in his 82 car, but they would end up 33rd. LeeRoy would crash out, a penalty that daredevil driving he patented at Jacksonville Speedway. LeeRoy wouldn't make a shot at Cup again until 1962, where he made 12 starts for various car owners. His season was headlined by a 5th place run at Valdosta in the number 179 Chevrolet. For 1963, he won the pole at Augusta and ran top 10 on multiple occasions, leading 8 laps. In 1964, he moved to running half the schedule and won his first 2 races at Savannah and Greenville. LeeRoy was spreading his name past the west suburb of Jacksonville, and people were noticing. He ran 38 races in total over the next 3 seasons, winning 2 more times and putting together even more impressive runs. In 1968, he went back up to nearly 30 races in a season, and won twice, driving the number 98 for Junior Johnson. The NASCAR Hall of Famer had officially strayed away from a driving career and was working on establishing a racing empire. Therefore, Johnson picked LeeRoy to help establish said empire, and for 1969, they won an impressive 7 races on the year. This was LeeRoy's best season yet. It was headlined by an incredible victory in the 1969 Daytona 500, which saw LeeRoy go full send into turn 3. He borderline went on the apron to pass Charlie Glotzenbach for the victory, and up to that point it was only second in Daytona 500 finishes than the 1959 finish. But at age 31, LeeRoy had already hit his peak, in not only his career, but in his life. Hardship was on the horizon, and it was about to devastate LeeRoy. To say LeeRoy Yarbrough was dedicated to his craft would have been an understatement. During his 1969 win in Atlanta, the man had suffered a 102-degree fever, but still pushed through the misery. He started in 1970 with Junior again, and in April headed to Texas World Speedway. He was the test tires for Goodyear, and LeeRoy flew around the massive track, and crashed. When they got to the car, he was unconscious, and was taken to the hospital for checking. With no apparent injuries and seeming alright overall, he left and was picked up by Cale Yarborough. The two were not related, keep that in mind, and they drove to Martinsville together. He continued to race, to which Junior Johnson noticed something wrong. Performance had dropped off and LeeRoy had been acting strange. Cale later noticed that LeeRoy had no recollection of his drive to Martinsville, nor the situation circulating around the crash at Texas. This was not completely uncommon. Many drivers at the time had, quote, gotten their bells wrong, and was either forgetful of events or shaken up over the next couple of weeks. But something was drastically wrong with LeeRoy. Eventually, Junior took LeeRoy out to eat, to diagnose for himself what was wrong with what in his opinion was the greatest driver he ever had. They ordered dinner, and the food came. Junior began eating, and he looked at LeeRoy. The fresh plate of food sat in front of him, cooling its temperature. After a couple questioned gazes and eventually Junior verbally stating for LeeRoy to eat, on command, like a trusty pet, LeeRoy did begin to eat the food. Concerns grew even more after that. But Junior's analysis stopped. Ford withdrew from racing in 1971, and the partnership came to an end. LeeRoy then headed to IndyCar, where Yarbrough had already competed in 3 Indy 500s up to that point. He decided to try and run more wheel attempts, and he prepped for his 4th go at the greatest spectacle in auto racing. During that, he crashed into turn 1 during practice, and again Cale Yarbrough, after doctors were done attending to him, was the first to see him, and concerns grew even more. All of the concerning traits displayed from the 1970 car ride were exasperated, and now LeeRoy looked horrified for his health. He spent the rest of the year either in a hospital or in a race car. He would run late models, winning over 30 races during that year. In 1972, he ran more Cup races with mediocre results. He attempted to get a ride for the 1973 Daytona 500, but whether out of fear for hurting the driver more or wrongful thoughts that he had lost his driving skill, nobody gave him a ride. This would be the last time he was saw at any racetrack. Not only did LeeRoy's driving career collapse, his personal life did as well. Over the next few years, he and his uncle Willie Lee would lose all of their money in a business venture. Whether that was an actual business trying for success, or somebody recognizing LeeRoy's weakened mental state and taking advantage of it, we may truly never know. But now broke in 1976, his wife left him, taking their 2 children from him as well. But in a very weird twist, neither one of them got the children as a result of the divorce. They went to the aforementioned Uncle Willie Lee and his wife. The judge made the decision based on the condition of both LeeRoy and Gloria. Drinking had become a larger and larger issue for Gloria, and had deteriorated her to the point that she apparently had become unfit. The judge, believing the same issue was with LeeRoy, set the same stipulation for both, that neither could see the children within 12 hours of drinking. But that wasn't the case for LeeRoy. The man apparently never consumed alcohol, according to multiple friends. At least from what I could research, the only time it was reported that he did drink was on holiday. He was simply acting like this in a sober state. With LeeRoy devastated and his mind in a mess, he resorted to the only place left for comfort, the only place he probably recognized: his mother. February 1980. The sun sets over the West Jacksonville suburbs, and an elderly Minnie Yarbrough sits quietly with her son. They're watching television. LeeRoy was never really known to talk much, and there was always action on track and calm at home. But something would be very different this night. LeeRoy turned to his mother and uttered the words, "Mother, I hate to do this to you." Minnie responded with a questioned look and said, "What do you mean?" LeeRoy stood up and walked to his mother's chair and lunged at her. He clenched his hands around her neck. Screams of distress and struggle cried out from the house. A passing family member hurried in to see what was happening and saw LeeRoy choking his mother. The 1969 Daytona 500 champion was now in handcuffs. He was to be charged with first-degree attempted murder and assault on an officer. In court, the judge heard the case and determined that LeeRoy was nowhere near in the right mindset to be found guilty of his crimes. Instead, he was admitted to the hospital in Jacksonville. If you were to ask Junior Johnson where he would rank LeeRoy Yarbrough in terms of driving talent, he would put him up there with Donnie Allison, Cale Yarbrough, and AJ Foyt. But this man now, by 1981, sits in a prison, medical staff consistently swarming him, classified as clinically insane. Many guards have sympathy for the fallen driver. They know who he is, what he has done, and more importantly, what he has lost. In an interview around this time with a newspaper doing a piece on him, actually one of the sources I used for this video, it's a very good read, link will be in the description, LeeRoy is quoted by saying, "I could still drive, just clear up whatever this is all about first." That is the only thing he remembers anymore. The racing. The year, the president, his age, family, people all around him are all a blur. Sickly poetic in the sense that the entity that took everything from him is the only thing left. The next 4 years of his life are all insulated inside either low-security prisons or a hospital. with LeeRoy's only focus being getting back to racing. Eventually, in 1984, on December 6th, LeeRoy had a seizure and fell, hitting his head yet again. It was in Jacksonville Hospital he died the next morning, age 46.